She's part of the wave of first-term Republican Congresswomen who are making their mark in Washington. Her past career in finance could prove to be a real asset. My conversation with Michigan Congresswoman Lisa McClain starts right now. The state of Michigan is shaped like a hand, and Michigan Congresswoman Lisa McClain represents an area affectionately referred to as the thumb. I'm so happy to give the thumbs up for having Congresswoman McClain agree to join us for today's conversation. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to talk to you about your professional background in just a moment, but first I'm curious, what compelled you to enter politics?
Well, I get that question a lot, but the simple answer is my daughter. I've always been political, but I really have spent the past 30 plus years raising my family and building a business. I'm Italian, so Sunday dinner is extremely important to me. Everyone comes back home for Sunday dinner, and I was crabbing about something at the dinner table. I don't remember what it was, but my daughter looked across the table at me and said, "Well, Mom, if you don't like it, why don't you do something about it?" And that really got me thinking, if not me, then who? Why not me? And a year and a half later, here I am.
Yeah, that's a great story, and that's how so many things that many of us commit to start sometimes. And you're based in a region known to be politically conservative. Was it a tough race, and was it tougher being a woman entering politics to get the support you needed?
I think the tough part about it was the primary, no question. That clearly was the race. I was the political outsider. That was a big deterrent for me because everybody and their brother was against me, except for the voters and the business people. And that really, I think, is what set me apart, is I had a good strategy, I worked really hard, and I had a good message.
And once you arrived in Washington, were there any real surprises, things that you hadn't thought out before?
What I didn't realize, and people told me this, is, Lisa, it's a lot different than business. When you get to DC, it's going to move slower. It's very partisan right now. It moves very slow, and there seems to be a lapse of logic. You know, cause and effect doesn't always rule the day, which is a little bit frustrating for me. But I'm working my way through it. Probably the biggest thing that I was excited about, though, is what we see on the media, and what mainstream media typically shows you is the extremes. What I found is there are the extremes, but the bulk of the people here truly want to do what is best for our country, and those are the people that I'm really trying to align myself with.
Your term started alongside an impressive number of other incoming Republican women. How have you gotten along with each other? Is everybody in sync, or how does that work?
Very well. We are almost a sorority, so to speak. We come from very diverse backgrounds, but what I found is our freshman class, and especially the women in our freshman class, we have really bonded together to become, I would say, friends. Everybody has been very warm, very welcoming, extremely supportive, and we have an agenda. And our agenda is to bring back the traditional American values that this country was built on.
And do you think that getting along and working alongside people that you can really communicate with, do you think this will bring more GOP women interested in running for the 2022 midterms?
I sure am hopeful that that's the case. And I think the women in Congress bring a very different perspective. Some positives, right? A few negatives, but I think what we're very good at is we're very good at multitasking, and then we also see the world from a different lens. I'm not saying that lens is right or wrong, but it just brings a different perspective and allows us to relate and touch a different group of people, which the more diverse we can be, the more people we can bring in under the tent, and the more people we can get to listen to our message.
There's been a lot of spending in Washington recently, and most experts agree it's leading to self-induced inflation. What's your take on this?
Well, this is extremely bizarre to me. My 30 plus years in business, not to mention raising a family and having to have a budget at home, I've never been in an environment where people don't talk about how we're supposed to pay for the spending. So I think there's a couple issues. The first issue is there's a big difference between want and need. And a lot of times we spend on wants versus needs. Our ability to prioritize, I think we can do a lot better on. But the second is, I've never been in a position where there's very little talk about how are we going to repay all of this debt and who's going to repay it. It's on the backs of our children and grandchildren, and that is extremely concerning for me. And we have got to get it. We've got to get a handle on our expenses.
I really agree with you. You know, we hear so much about we're spending this and this much for infrastructure, but let's, you know, I hope we'll get it into terms that most people understand exactly what it means. Well, I want to talk more about the economy and how your background in financial services may help steer us towards smarter decision making, both in Washington and in our own lives. That and more when we return. Welcome back. I'm continuing my conversation with Michigan Congresswoman Lisa McClain. Before entering politics, Congresswoman, you had a long career with the Hance Group, which provides a full slate of financial planning services, including brokerage, insurance, taxes, and estate planning. How are you hoping to put that background to use to get the nation's fiscal house in order?
Well, again, I think it goes back to the traditional American values. Is at that company, I was blessed to work with the American people, no different than I am now. And they had goals and they had objectives, and they wanted a better life for their kids and their grandkids, and they wanted to be financially stable. And that's what we were able to help them do, and really financially free. We taught people how to become debt-free and how to achieve their goals. And life is about trade-offs as well, meaning we can't have everything we want when we want it. And I think a lot of those values we need to come back and instill in government today. This is the best country that one can live in. Let's not forget, people are coming over on rafts to get into this country. But an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. We have some pride, we have some savings, we have wants, but we also talk about how to get there and what's the best way to get there. We put budgets in place with people, and we mitigated risk. All those concepts are very applicable to government. We just need to talk about them.
Some say we dug ourselves, though, into a financial hole that we may never get out of. Is this your belief, and what are your thoughts on this, and how do we get out of it?
Well, first and foremost, we have to get out of it by admitting we have a problem. And right now, we have a spending problem. Yes, I would love to get my kids everything they want. The problem is that's not reality. So let's begin to prioritize. And to get out of this mess, I think one of the things we need to start with, let's start with a balanced budget. Listen, we didn't get to this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of this situation overnight. But we first have to admit we have a spending problem, and we need to get that spending problem under control. Then step two is, let's prioritize what it is that we need. And then third, what do we invest in for the future?
You know, what are some of the areas beyond that where you suggest we rein in government spending? And I think it's a lot on people's minds. It's very concerning.
So let's start with what I think is important. So one, I think the government's job is to defend and protect us. So one of the areas of expense that I think we need to spend money on is our military to protect our shores. Number two, I think jobs in the economy is extremely important because that gives you tax revenue, that gives you pride, that leads to more investment. Where we need to rein in our spending is a lot of the ancillary expenses. As much as I love, let's take a look at this infrastructure bill. Let's deal with true infrastructure, roads, bridges, waterways, even throw broadband in there. Art for the subway station, I don't believe that's true infrastructure. So for example, when I'm building a house, my foundation, my walls, my flooring, my heat, that is infrastructure. The art in the pictures that I put on the wall, that's not infrastructure. And those are the types of things that we have got to rein in.
Mm-hmm. You're on record as supporting a balanced budget amendment. Do you think this is an area where Democrats and Republicans could find some common ground?
I want to say yes, but honestly, I don't think so. I think we are so far, the Democrats and the Republicans are so far apart on the balanced budget. It's going to be a lot of work to get to the middle.
Yeah. A good number of our viewers are either in retirement or in retirement planning mode, and given the current state of the economy, and as you say, could be a very lack of agreement on spending, is there advice you can share that will help them to preserve or grow their own assets?
So what I would share with all types of people is the number one thing is try to live within your means. And one of our goals was to be debt-free because you have a lot more freedom when you don't have this debt hanging over you. And the biggest thing I think we can do, and I know we've done this for our family, is try to live within your means. It's difficult, but that's the best advice that I can give to people.
And I think a lot of people believe that. Funding for the nation's infrastructure, however, has become this political football. Democrats say they won't pass a physical infrastructure bill without reconciliation funding for social infrastructure. So where do you stand on this, and how do we get through this?
One of the biggest frustrating pieces of being in DC for me is just what we name the bills. So if we're going to talk about infrastructure, let's talk about infrastructure. If we want to talk about social programs, I'm fine talking about social programs, but let's not put them in the fine print of an infrastructure bill, for example. Let's deal with each issue straight on as it pertains to the issue that we're debating. Let's stop putting all this pork and fine print in the bills and playing politics. I think we'd get a lot further down the road. And I think if you look now, look at the political football is not only between the Democrats and Republicans now. I think if we just stand down, I think you're going to see a lot of infighting between the Democrats right now, because you can't say, hey, I give you my word that this is the bill we're going to pass, and then 2 hours later say, no, I'm going to put $6 trillion in under reconciliation. Let's just deal honestly with one another.
Immigration and border security remains a concern. When we come back, we'll talk to Congresswoman McClain about it. Stay tuned. I'm back with Michigan Congresswoman Lisa McClain. I know Michigan is a lot closer to Canada than Mexico, but is it fair to say that we need to be vigilant against illegal immigration regardless of where the immigrants are coming from?
100%. And although Michigan isn't close to the border, the issues that we're having at the border, they're affecting my state. We have illegal, unaccompanied minors that are in a facility in Albion, Michigan, in my state, not to mention the amount of drugs that are coming over the border at the rate of 300 to 400%. Those drugs, those opioids, fentanyl, heroin, they're ending up in my state and my community.
I understand, Congresswoman, you're a big supporter of our military and that you are supporting a bill designed to protect data from members of our military from falling into the hands of the communists in China. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the issue that we're having is the Chinese government does not play fair. And that's a big concern. In every committee hearing that I'm in, our number one threat is China. We must protect our intellectual property from the Chinese. And I think they're hitting us on 3 points. One, in our schools, at our education level. Second, they're hitting us economically. And third, they're hitting us militarily. We need to protect our property, our intellectual property, to make sure that that does not fall into the hands of the Chinese government. One of the bills, I call it the TikTok bill, is that I've introduced is we need to protect the data from TikTok that our users are giving that do not fall into the Chinese government's hands, and they do not use that without our authorization. And that's a big problem right now because the Chinese government is taking our data and using it. For what? I'm not 100% sure, but it's not theirs to take.
You were one of more than 20 GOP committee members demanding an apology from Congressman Donald Norcross for calling fellow Congressman Bob Good a racist. The only thing Congressman Good did was simply question critical race theory. Are you concerned that an unproven theory has caused this level of controversy on Capitol Hill?
I'm gravely concerned. And it's on so many levels. Number one, we are at one of the highest levels of government. We are supposed to be setting an example for the American people and our children. And the example that we're setting is if I don't agree with you on an issue, I just call you a name. I think we're better than that, number one. But what we can't do is we can't debate the issues anymore. So if I don't agree with you on the issue, I just bully you. I call you a name. I call you a racist. We can do better than that. What type of example, and I'm going to say it again, what type of example are we setting for our kids?
And does all this speak to the double standard in Washington? Some Republicans get denounced for certain comments while members of the squad make outrageous comments, and there's virtually no retribution. And you know, it's just puzzling, confusing, insulting. How have your constituents weighed in on critical race theory?
Well, my constituents, as I think most of America, believe in diversity. They believe that you should not label people, and the people who are doing the labeling are potentially one of the biggest discriminators that there are. Because once you label people, you've already set the agenda. You don't know me. My color of my skin or the gender that I am has no bearing on who I am. It's extremely disappointing, but I say this all the time. If it wasn't for double standards, we would have no standards at all. And the best thing I can do is to continue to call out those double standards. And I use a sports analogy. If both teams get 3 strikes, if that's the rule, then both teams should get 3 strikes. So what's good for one side should be good for the other. Again, isn't that what we teach our kids?
You know, and it really should be. But also, I don't want to leave today without asking you to tell us a bit about balancing family and politics. And I loved it when I heard you still make Sunday dinner and you make time to play with your dog Peanut. Tell us a little bit more about that. I think it's great. How do you
So I think
handle all of this?
when people talk about coming out to Washington and the swamp, it is a bubble out here. So what's very important to me is that I fly home all the time to be with my family, to be with my district. That's where I am most at home. My family and friends and the people that I surround myself with are extremely positive, encouraging, and supportive of me. And I could not do this job without my family and my friends and my supporters. So that is where I go home to get grounded. And they do a really good job of keeping me grounded. So my daughters still want family dinners, and that's a tradition that we're going to continue to keep. One of these days, maybe we'll have you over for family dinner and you can experience it firsthand.
I'd love to see you do that. I think that's great. Thanks so much for talking with me today, Congresswoman.